Thank you for the invitation to this symposium. I will read the text that we prepared together with NARVIKA. And so let me begin. In a memorable passage from The Language of New Media by Lev Manovich, we find the following statement. In short, the avant-garde became materialized in a computer. He connects the historical avant-garde montage of, in the beginning, unrelated parts with the construction of communicative wholes through new information and communication media, whereby avant-garde procedures are incorporated into the very operation of computer hardware and software. So let's break apart this quote into its constituent elements. For the language of new media that structures new media objects, the key avant-garde model is Dziga Vertov's film Man with a Movie Camera, which, in stark contrast to Sergei Eisenstein's narrative innovations in the domain of montage, departs from any story-based or film world coherence. In Vertov's idea, the pieces, recordings, the film takes that are concatenated in the projection do not combine into a real new whole. This film remains a disparate archive of recordings, and the archive as an apparatus becomes an interface to the collection, which has been sampled from reality using the camera. Even the film shot, as the elementary foundation of the film language, is destroyed by throwing the camera in the air, which makes the shot articulation impossible. The camera is out of control, and this makes it clear that Vertov was not interested in the modern film montage at all. Here Manovich therefore implies that what Eisenstein meant for the cinema, Dziga Vertov represents in the domain of new media art. By referring to the disarticulated shot by Vertov and a similar throw of the film camera in The Clockwork Orange by Stanley Kubrick, the Slovenian neo-avant-garde and new media artist Srečo Dragan, who is present here today, so we can ask him later something about these works, he developed the concept of the so-called shot of the interactive entering. It is a two-dimensional panorama, a collage made of photos, of the spherical view of a camera. Here the interaction is the viewer-interactor's decision on the point of engagement with the image. In this case, the panoramic representation is of course not a coincidence, since the portrait composition would evoke the unity of a whole, let's say a portrait, whereas any reception of a panoramic image evolves in a succession. The simultaneous availability of the panorama is a challenge to choose the diachronic trajectory to the image, and that, of course, results in the interaction. So, it is therefore reasonable to claim that Vertov's model fits the new media. The question remains whether the avant-garde, as a complex socio-historical phenomenon, is as such included in this connection. In a paper from 1980, Janko Kos, a prominent Slovenian comparatist, renowned for his Geistesgeschichte type systematization of literary history, considers the avant-garde a socio-literary phenomenon, embodied in belligerent groups of artists, and links it with the absolute romantic subjectivity as formulated, for instance, by Friedrich Schlegel in his Athenaeum fragments. In this romantic framework, the free self-denial grounds the most radical kind of human autonomy and liberation, found, for instance, in an infinite regress that can, and I quote Friedrich Schlegel, that can raise that reflection again and again to a higher power, can multiply it in an endless succession of mirrors. Such endless succession of mechanically reflecting mirrors can remind us of the bleak grayness in Gerhard Richter's works in glass, and Walter Benjamin's bleak understanding of the allegory in Baroque and Romanticism. For Janko Kos, however, the modernism of Joyce Proust Beckett disavows the romantic imaginary. The new fluidity of non-individualized consciousness is simultaneously its dissolution. And I quote, "A literary creator who builds his work from the typical consciousness of modernism will become an avant-garde artist only when he acknowledges the validity of romantic absolute subjectivism in the social sphere of his life. As if he can achieve freedom in his social literary existence, which is at least a prefiguration of an absolute subject, if not its true realization. An artist who does not recognize this metaphysical principle cannot become a member of the avant-garde." David Cottington's book on the avant-garde in the Oxford Very Short Introduction series similarly distinguishes modernism and the avant-garde. Modernism are, and I quote, "the ways in which artists of all kinds have articulated their experiences of modernity, whether they have been in avant-garde groupings or not." End of quote. Modernity consists of a combination of three kinds of experiences: the globalization of the Western world since the early 19th century, the new communication media, and the, I quote, "the interior mental, psychological states of mind that can be related to loss of community, uprootedness, decenteredness, and so on." The adjective avant-garde and the abstract noun predate the meaning of the avant-garde as a formation, a network of identifiable distinct social groupings, a club with its craft traditions and membership. Some of, in Cottington's opinion, most of the modernist artists also take part in the avant-garde. Outsiders are in turn labeled naive, for instance, painters Henri Rousseau or Alfred Wallace, or bound to folk or vernacular traditions, for instance, the composer Béla Bartók. Cottington follows three phases of the avant-garde: its emergence, the consolidation, and the co-option in different art disciplines. For instance, the neo-impressionist Georges Seurat's painting A Saturday on La Grande Jatte is a founding work of the emerging artistic avant-garde in Paris. Because of its large dimensions, it counters the market of paintings for private use. It counters the spontaneous expressiveness of Impressionism. Its pointillist technique is systematic, dispassionate, and almost machine-made. Cottington says, each color being added according to a quasi-scientific calculation. This quality of the paint gives the picture surface a screen-like appearance. And he comments, a not unreasonable simile, since the individual spots of various colors were apparently intended by Seurat to merge when seen from appropriate distance, and thereby capture the perceived colors of the scene more accurately. And this is the same principle behind the pixelations of a color TV screen. So let's note that we will later look at Sergio Dragan's work that builds on this reflection. The oppositional stance is essential to the avant-garde, as well as the focus on new mass communication media. Cottington also links the avant-garde networks to the increasing professionalization of the modern capitalism in the 1980s. The avant-garde realized an internationally oriented but alternative professionalism. The informal network before the 1914 led to further consolidation through institutionalization processes based on the model of the international monopoly capitalism. The co-option starts in New York in 1930s, where the art market consolidated even more. The interwar leftist political leanings that surfaced in Europe became depoliticized as part of the Cold War propaganda. Can then the avant-garde neutralize its co-opted state and reinvent itself as radical art? This question cannot be answered here. It is the case that the avant-garde explored the machine-based production, as seen in the case of Seurat's pointillism. The open problem remains the focus on an absolutely autonomous artist who, of course, can playfully embrace fragmentary discourse promoted by the collage and montage techniques. But is this something that materializes also in a computer, as suggested by Manovic by saying the avant-garde became materialized in a computer? Söke Dinkler considers the neo-avant-garde happenings, for instance, of Alan Capro, as predecessors to the interactive computer art. The authoritative role of the artist and the notion of the work that is preserved in this hybrid between the audience emancipation and manipulation is compared to programs and automatization. But how do computers work? How do they actually glue together new collages? The modern computer resulted from Alan Turing's invention of an imaginary machine to solve the decision problem in mathematics, which has been posed by David Hilbert. The formalism in mathematics means that only mechanical operations, so only mechanical operations on inscriptions are considered. There is no understanding or thinking involved. Turing's computing machine and the universal Turing machine that can emulate all other machines are merely transforming material inscriptions. The computer is a meta-medium, according to Manovic. It can simulate all already existing and potentially existing media. The generative art is mechanically producing more or less complex patterns according to rules. In the 1969, Nusha and Srećo Dragan realized a performance in winter 72 hours and autumn 72 hours. It is a land art project of the expanded Slovensk neo-avant-garde group OHO. The artists were assuming the role of programmers, moving the performers' bodies as things according to an algorithm and synchronizing the stepwise progress by uttering numbers N-invasive 21 and 22. 3 meetings in Tivoli Park in Ljubljana took place with the instructions. Meeting Panoraden without touching with the tree in the middle in Tivoli Park, meeting Panoraden with palms touching with the tree in the middle in the Tivoli Park, meeting Panoraden with the soles touching with the tree in the middle in the Tivoli Park. Performance art differs from the theater in its rejection of the fictive roles. The performer displays her own self, body, mind, its context, in an autobiographical situation. The materiality of the theater as an apparatus is emphasized also in the related idea of post-dramatic theater by Hans Lehmann. Such turn to the material aspect of artistic and social practices could be seen as reminiscent of the mechanical processes. However, as a rule, the avant-garde formations reject total mechanization, which is conditioned for computers. There is no intelligence as a source of information as semantic content in the artificial intelligence, for instance. The philosopher Luciano Floridi attempts to define an agent, artificial or not, as involving interactivity, autonomy, and adaptability. In his list of examples, the interactive, autonomous, and non-adaptive entity, and therefore not an actual agent, is the juggernaut, an enormous carriage carrying an image of Vishnu, of which was reported that some worshippers deliberately allowed themselves to be crushed beneath the vehicle's wheels as a sacrifice to the god. Such machine never stops repeating the same rules. It crushes whoever interacts, and it starts moving autonomously. Of course, if one cannot explain how machine learning algorithm actually learns, the source code might be hidden, then not stopping might be a kind of adapting, of changing the internal rules. In the philosophy of artificial agents, this is a question to be scrutinized. However, in the domain of the avant-garde art schools, an illustrative example is provided by the Oulipo, the Paris group combining mathematical approach to algorithms as constraints and literature. The group developed the computer-based branch, the Alamo, which would be translated from French as Workshop for Literature Assisted by Mathematics and Computers. The Europeans did realize their text generators on computers early on, such as the famous 100,000 billion poems by Raymond Queneau, but were, for the most part, not genuinely interested in data processing. Also, their understanding of constraints was not a strict one. The Epicurean idea of Klineman motivated and rationalized the cases of breaking the rules. For instance, Georges Perec explored his fascination with machine errors in the radio play Die Maschine in German. What is sometimes called glitches by the new media artists. Chris Andrews explains that the author Perec, he is the one who knows how to dispose irregularities with skill. He quotes a letter by Perec to the translator. To begin with, I wanted to explore the relationship between system error, since here he quotes Paul Klee, genius is the error in the system. First I thought, this is where poetry lies. Then it occurred to me that the genius of the machine is the precise opposite, to be a system based on error. End of quote. In his text, Andrews comments examples and position statements within Oulipo where the machine-like art is construed closer to Seurat's quasi-scientific calculation than to Turing's material operations-based conception. It is about a more or less critical simulation of the machines and technology. Computer juggernauts that don't learn do not leave space for human autonomy that the avant-garde needs. So, Yuri Lotman, when I heard about this colloquium, his name sprang to my mind because of also what Christina mentioned. So he is a theorist of the periphery, in particular in the sense that within the semiosphere, the reality consisting of signification that we inhabit, the marginal regions are active and the centers passive, which brings about shifts. The previously marginal becomes new center of culture, like in the case of the avant-gardes and cinema, which are among Lotman's examples. Yuri Lotman's idea is present in the current shift of mechanical information processes to the center of the globalized culture. We are witnessing, according to Luciano Floridi, the information revolution, the transformation of our world into the infosphere, where the environment and its organisms are construed homogeneously as information processes. Human is not the only agent anymore. We are historically decentered once more as only one kind of informational organism, an inform. The entities inhabiting the infosphere range from the most fundamental lacks of uniformity, the environmental data as patterns. Next, there are organisms with bodies that are kept together by chemical bonding forces. A higher level are intelligent animals that are maintained by the mutual information, separated from the environment by a sort of cognitive membrane. Finally, a so-called conscious membrane separates the mind using semantic bonding forces. The mind appropriates and unifies all experiences for later repurposing. This is a figuratively construed model of the development of the self, on the informational level, of course, by Luciano Floridi. The three membranes, the corporeal, the cognitive, and the conscious membrane, are presented with images. A sunflower, that of course reacts to the sun, a bird on the sunflower, and a gardener watching the bird on the sunflower. Floridi's theory of the self as synchronic individualization, so how we become an individual person from the synchronic point of view. So the description what, for instance, human personal identity. So what is this human personal identity in informational terms offers some key advantages in the current moment. One can study and understand artificial agents, the hybrid human and natural and artificial multi-agent systems, and so on. The image of a human is radically changing. She is no longer a Cartesian mind in foreign matter, but finds herself in a new homogeneous environment made of information. It is the case that the data processing introduces into today's world a decoupling between understanding and agency that was once thought to necessarily require active thinking. The artificial intelligence can be meaningfully represented as a resource, a reservoir of agency separated from intelligence. The frictionless information flow in the digitized infosphere of today is seen in the dilemmas around personal privacy. The informational approach to a personal self allows for serious examination of privacy breaches. If one is an informational entity, that is to say, a bundle of information, then any changes to its integrity becomes ethically questionable. For instance, by taking from, by recording or profiling, or by adding to the personality, by brainwashing somebody with an informational overflow. The ethical issues therefore concern the informational integrity and the possible agency of the entity and its parts. If one is recorded by a surveillance camera, then this part of the identity, remember, consisting of information, is telepresent in some control room. But the person cannot act at such a telepresent location. As mentioned previously about the neo-avant-garde happenings, the participants are emancipated and manipulated at the same time. The programming of the conceptualist could be seen as an intrusion into informational packages that are personal identities. Alan Caprow considers happenings as events where something should occur, and the attention to this more or less coincidental event should be perceived in a state of raised attention. The visitors should participate and presumably be transformed. It is not for them to learn a story. The process of participation in happenings reaches into the visitors in order to manipulate or let grow their personal identities. Identity of informational integrity is the subject of performances and happenings of Srećo and Nuša Dragan from the neo-conceptualist period that we have already mentioned. This extends to the latest new media works by Srećo Dragan, the techno-performances that take place on the stage of mixed and augmented reality, where a multitude of interfaces, sensors, algorithms, mediate between the self-awareness, memory, declarations, and the body, perception, movements, gestures, of course, of the participant. And this builds an archives of connections for a society which is established through technology. Dragan's concept of socialization through artistic communication, which is a performative educational practice that interferes with the user's identity, becomes a central idea. So socialization in general is the process whereby an individual learns to adjust to a group or society and behave in a manner approved by it. Socialization essentially represents the whole process of learning throughout the life course. As such, it is also a contested issue, as in the case of an oppressive gender socialization. Srećo Dragan's interactive installation Metaphorical Facsimiles from 2007 makes the gallery visitor learn, that is to say, be transformed in an art-based socialization about the impressionist idea of mixing colors in human perception. The principle mentioned regarding Seurat's pointillism. The Techno-Performance starts with the visitor, when the visitor steps in front of the web camera and the computer vision algorithm detects the visitor's face. The act of detection is displayed on the computer screen or a large video projection as one of the elements on the project's interface. The participants then select two color points from the digitized image of The Sower by Ivan Grohar. The system mixes the chosen colors and displays the new color thus obtained. The participant must name it. She thereby articulates her experience of this color. For instance, Dragan would have recognized and named the deep green of the river basin, which was imprinted in his memory of color perception as the color of the Krka River in his hometown of Kostanjevica na Krki. The interaction is time-based. The timer on the interface presses the participant to articulate her color experience in a very short time frame. If unsuccessful, the participant can repeat the Techno-Performance and try again. By articulating the color experience, the participants activate their memory, develop their color perception and the ability to articulate non-verbal experiences. The personal integrity of the visitor is challenged and possibly also transformed, establishing an initiation point for a new techno-enabled mode of visual culture.